You may have heard about CityWorks Expo. For years now, we've been bringing people together to share big ideas for better places. Expo connects innovators across the community and around the globe through an ongoing series of events, conferences, and social media. And our goal is to inspire and support people like you, the ones who have a passion for making their neighborhoods, communities, and cities better places to live, work, and play. Check us out at cityworksxpo.com to learn more. Become a part of the Expo community and share your story. You never know who you will inspire with your big ideas.
So you guys have endured long days and hurricanes and hangovers and now I get to try to back clean up on this thing. What an amazing couple of days, and let me just echo. I've been involved in production of very big events, very expensive events, and the team, Ed, Amy, the extended team, the production folks, they've made a lot of things look easy that really aren't easy. Even the way that the room shrank when we came back in today, just really amazing work. So kudos to everybody involved. And then a disclosure before I sort of dive off into this. Macklin, where are you? Right there. So Macklin and I decided to go to lunch together. We were walking. We were probably going to get something healthy, and we walked by Thelma's Chicken and Waffles. So there's waffle right here, and there's fried chicken, and there's syrup on top of it. So my brain is going, give a speech, and my body's going, go to sleep. So bear with me. New folks and some returning folks. Some of you from last year remember, this is me. My name's Josh. A little bit about me. My work is focused on post-industrial cities. I've stayed mostly east of the Mississippi, in large part because we don't have a lot of post-industrial cities on the left coast yet, but they'll get there. I'm going to be busy until I get a lot older. A lot of time spent in Chattanooga, Tennessee, a city that lost its population over the 60s, 70s, and 80s and has regained it over the 90s and 2000s. Our work there went very well. We were part of a 35-year overnight success. I got called out into other cities. I got called to the place that a post-industrial city guy would get called to, Detroit, Michigan. Interestingly, this photo is Detroit circa 2015. So notice nothing's on fire. You see no police cars. Detroit, actually, the story of what is real there is very different than the post-apocalyptic hellscape that the media has made it out to be. And it's not that it's a very hard and very sad place, but it's also a very hopeful place that will probably show the rest of the world what's going to happen in the future. So I have a mini-me in mannerism and everything, Joseph Bull. I don't get to see him as much as I'd like to, but next week I'm going home. I work for an entrepreneur. Some of you heard this on our first day. Dan is a fascinating guy, in my opinion, running the largest social enterprise in America, in that he's got Quicken Loans and he channels those profits into buying the buildings that nobody else wanted to buy in Detroit, about 80 of them so far. Dan is on top of the sort of muscle and might, and I try to lend some of my heart to that organization. It's a really interesting and dynamic and ever-evolving partnership. So for those of you that are here last year, you know that my work is to strengthen cities, and I talked about things that I've done, stuff I'm most proud of, and try to tell you guys how to do that yourselves, how to help entrepreneurs, how to help artists, how to find something that is not working and make it work, whether you have $0 or whether you have $1,000 or sometimes whether you have $100,000. And so that's what I usually talk about. But I came here last year, and I go a lot of these places. I used to go to a lot more. I've sort of shaved it off because Dan's very demanding. But I've been to a lot of these places, and I went to one last Wednesday, and they paid me a lot of money to do it. And I went, and they, I was like, okay. And I talked to all the mayors in the state of Indiana. There was no Q&A. There was no after discussion. It had no heart. But this place has so much heart. And so I wanted to come back because this is the place for those rare people who are trying to take their dreams and turn them into action. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about dreamers, and I think that this is really the best primer that there is still to this day on dreaming.
The crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. While some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
So some of you know that Steve Jobs actually scripted that commercial. Still, I think one of the most powerful commercials that's ever been made. And from that, I remember seeing it at a very formative age. I've grown a love for these folks, and I've read tons about the people that we consider the world's greatest dreamers. And over time, I've developed this realization that in our superficial understanding of the dreamers, we've really glossed over a lot of history that's important for those of us that are trying to do things to know. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into years and years of study on those particular dreamers. First, I think that they're courageous and naive at the same time. For example, Gregor Mendel, who was a Czechoslovakian monk who was totally uneducated, is the person that we have to thank for the founding of modern genetics. He was growing peas at the monastery, and in growing peas, he saw when he actually hybridized them together that different things happen. His formative observations on genetics really is what the shoulders of modern genetics stand on. George Eastman was a guy who wanted to take a vacation. He was a high school dropout, and he wanted to take photos on that vacation, and he rounded up all the stuff, and it was too heavy to take on the trip. So he decided not to take the trip. He took the money for the trip, and he started the Kodak Corporation. And the Wright Brothers, we celebrate the Wrights. One state over from here in Ohio, they're really big on Orville and Wilbur. The truth of Orville and Wilbur is they were the underdogs in this situation. They were not aeronautics experts. They were not the team that was supposed to be first in flight. They were bicycle mechanics who were extrapolating out what they had learned and applying it to a new field, and they actually won the race. I find firsthand knowledge to be the father of invention for the dreamers. Alexander Graham Bell, a lot of people don't know that both his mother and his wife were deaf, so that led to his need for amplification of sound. Steve Jobs, a lot of his formative experience was at Atari, working with games, and 18 and 19-year-old stoners, so his obsession with simplicity was what's the minimum viable thing that you need for people that are trying to operate the product? And this wonderful story that I heard about Gandhi, which is one time he was getting onto a train and one of his shoes fell down between the tracks. And without hesitation, he took off the other shoe and dropped it, and the person that was with him said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, now whoever finds them will have a pair that they can actually put to use." The dreamers actually make teams out of misfits, too, these sort of unexpected pairings of people. Frank Lloyd Wright notably did it with building the fellowship. He couldn't figure out a business model that would work and ended up turning it into a teaching program where the students actually paid him for the opportunity to learn with him. The fellowship's actually a really good book, contentious and problem-filled environment, but that left us with these architectural artifacts that we still marvel at. And, I sort of obsessed on Thomas Edison. The group that was at Menlo Park was fascinating. You had watchmakers from Switzerland. You had folks who worked with concrete. You had carpenters. And you had other magic that happened there, too. If you notice, that's actually a pipe organ in the back. And Edison and team worked around the clock, and if they'd hit a lull, Edison himself would go to the pipe organ and start playing, and they'd get beer out. They'd have a couple of rounds, and then they'd go back to work again. The dreamers also collaborate but rarely compromise, and this is very true for community work, where the first thing we're taught is to compromise. Great examples in jobs who had a self-professed bozo detector. Anyone who was really not fitting in to his prevailing cultural winds was identified by the bozo detector and actually ushered out of the organization. Amelia Earhart, if you get the chance, Google Amelia Earhart letter to husband. Way before prenuptial agreements and way before a wife would ever send a husband a prenuptial agreement. Amelia, at the time that she was getting married, wrote a letter to her husband that basically said, if we don't bring out the best in each other, that shall be our end. And then my adopted grandmother, who at 87 years old, 6 weeks ago, looked me in the eyes, and she's really the godmother of Chattanooga's revitalization. All of these tiny little roads lead back to her and her influence. 87 years old, I was telling her about my work in Detroit and that I probably needed to develop some patience. Looked me square in the eyes and said, don't be patient. You find that causes need both catalysts and champions. A lot of us have heard of Susan B. Anthony and her role in women's suffrage, but before Susan B. Anthony, the person who really charted the territory was a lady named Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Interestingly, the catalyst is often not remembered by history, and the champion is, but they are equally vital roles in a historical sense. And there's great debate for those of us that are into Edison or Tesla as to who screwed who and who's more important. I actually take a holistic view on the subject when people ask me about it. You needed Tesla, the mad scientist, on the invention side. You needed Edison, the productizing scientist who knew how to systematize things. And then honestly, you needed George Westinghouse, the industrialist, to put the money behind it and commercialize the whole thing. You needed the catalyst and the champions. And then Henry Ford mentioned in the last speech, and many of us don't know Ferdinand Verbier, but Ferdinand Verbier is actually attributed with making the automobile. But we all think of Henry Ford, the champion who brought it to the masses. The dreamers, if they get into a place of doubt, they simplify. I love the work of Charles and Ray Eames. I've gone to see some of the molds that they made chairs with. Obsessed with finding a better way to sit, so much so that hundreds of molds later, they finally reached a place of perfection, which is a single sculpted piece of formed plywood that makes the office chairs that many of us sit in today. Jobs, who once ousted from Apple, came back, and they had this smattering of unintelligible products, who put it into this 4-quadrant system and said, this is all we should care about: the consumer, the pro, the portable, and the desktop, the environment that influences everything that we do today in a computing sense. And Ernest Hemingway, most writers have a 3, maybe 4-stage edit process. Hemingway had a 10 to 12-step editing process where he would take 10 words out of 25 words and make them say the same thing more powerfully. That's why so many people are compelled by Hemingway's writing, is its utter simplicity. It came out of utter complexity. You see that the dreamers always engage in the assault of sustained thinking. Edison and team didn't test out a few things and found the light bulb. There was actually 2,000 substrates that they tried. They ordered materials from all around the globe and passed electricity through them until they finally found the right sort of elements, and actually the carbon injection, a number of other things. There's Edison bulbs that he made that are still operating today. Fred Smith was at Yale and wrote a paper on the future of package delivery. He was given a C on that paper. And Aldrin and Armstrong are who we think about on the moon landing, but they were about 0.00005% of the whole team. It was 400,000 people that made the moon landing possible. And then dreamers aren't afraid of despair. Marie Curie, that we have to thank for all of our modern chemotherapy system, came from a family, an immigrant family that lost everything multiple times. She herself at first had to struggle with basic life needs. and then produced these incredible advances for humanity. George Washington Carver, the noted scientist, had 11 siblings, all of which died prematurely. He himself was born into slavery. And Buckminster Fuller, one of my heroes, was in his mid-30s and didn't invent anything, didn't say anything to the masses, and really didn't do much good until he lost a child, and then dedicated the rest of his life to the service of humanity. You also find that genius and madness are close kin. Isaac Newton, who we have to thank for much of modern calculus, a lot of physics, was, as we'd say in the little town called Rockmart that I grew up, crazier than a shithouse mouse. If there was a condition, if there was a condition that you could have, if you look at the historical documents, it seems that Newton probably had it. He was certifiable, probably would have been institutionalized if he had lived in our day. Nikola Tesla was incredibly OCD. He had to knock 3 times as he came in and out of his dwelling. He had to have 18 napkins for every meal. He was deeply troubled and also deeply creative. And Abraham Lincoln, the man who started us on the journey of answering to America's original sin, suffered from debilitating depression and was in bed for many weeks at a time. The dreamers also understand failure very well. Henry Ford went flat broke 5 times. Walt Disney was once fired by a newspaper editor because he was perceived to have no innate creativity. And Theodore Seuss Geisel, Dr. Seuss, tried 27 times to get To Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street published. Now think, if he had only tried 26, how different would your childhood have been? So a few more lessons that I've learned as sort of a dreamer and a wannabe dreamer and doer. Honesty is really the only policy. My grandfather taught me this. You know, some people like to say honesty is the best policy. If you're going to get things done in life, honesty is the only policy, because otherwise you end up tripping on the little white lies that you told across time. The cowboy or cowgirl in a white horse myth is exactly that. I love the guys from Black Dog Salvage because they sort of revealed that to us in real time. One system leaders are just totally BS. There's always a yin and a yang. There's always 2 people, maybe one in the shadows, maybe one that's out front. But you need someone that balances you out. If we're going to have 360-degree field of view, you got to have someone you're standing back to back with. To truly understand, you must experience firsthand. I really enjoyed getting to know Jonathan. He's hanging out back there somewhere. Nothing better than just getting out on foot and walking across the United States. You know, don't say you know something until you actually know something. There's a really big difference between problems and symptoms. You know, last year I mentioned fall in love with your problems, not with your solutions. I was in Jackson, Mississippi 2 weeks ago, and everybody wanted to talk to me about potholes. And potholes were the problem. We have to deal with potholes. And the mayor had said we need to pray about the potholes. And he put it out on Twitter. And so then the hipsters made a shirt, and it had a steamroller on it, and Jesus was driving. It said, "Jesus paves." And I said to all of them, it's a symptom. Your problem is you're losing your people. We looked at their population runs from the 80s on. They were losing people every year. They don't have enough tax money to fill the damn holes in the pavement. We've got to work both on and in our projects. You know, for people who do, it's all too easy to roll up our sleeves and just make it happen. But we have to step back from it with some regularity and say, okay, am I making all the difference that I can? Am I doing all that I want to do? Am I involving as many people as I want to involve? And that involves stepping away from your work, working on it instead of in it. This is a new one for me. Be mindful of the McManus effect. I'd encourage all of you to Google the McManus effect. It's really cool. There's these guys that stand on top of this huge dam, and they take a basketball and they do a couple things. One, they drop it and it just falls straight down, and then they take it and they chunk it and they see how far it goes. And then they do one more thing. They take that basketball and they put a little backspin on it. And when they put the little backspin on it, it goes down, and then a little negative pressure forms behind that basketball, and it goes way further than it went when they chunked it. And so it's changed the way I think about my work, because I'm always thinking now, what's the little backspin? What's the little backspin I'm putting on this that may change the long arc of what I'm trying to accomplish? And I think expectations and embarrassment rule the world. We see this all the time with embarrassment. If the man or the lady doth protest too much, if Ted Haggard is saying that gay sex is a problem, he's probably having it. If Elliot Spitzer says that high-end Johns are a problem, he probably is one. I think that we have to be very mindful of when we're exercising our own agenda from a place of embarrassment. And I think we have to be very careful around the expectations that we put on ourselves and other people. When I find people that are most sideways with each other, it's not that they've truly wronged each other, it's that they've violated each other's expectations. I've also learned recently that obsession's probably underrated. We have this sort of negative association with the idea, oh, you're obsessed. As I've met the Fortune 400 types, my boss is on there, I realize that the people that build big things are obsessed with them. They never stop thinking about them. It's around the clock. It's a disease that we look fondly upon as a society. But we need that for people not just making money. We need people that are obsessed with doing good. Distance draws clarity. It's so good for me to be out of Detroit this weekend, because as I drive back in, everything will happen to me with fresh eyes. What changed over the 5 days that I was gone will be very clear to me, but if I stay in it too much, it becomes invisible. I think if you can only be one thing in life, be a good listener. I think if people ask me sometimes, how have you gotten to where you are? It's by listening. For those of us working in cities, and I know there's a lot of planning students in the room, I hate to tell you that opportunism is probably more important than planning. It's an outlook. It's finding the little things that are catching on fire and pouring gasoline on those fires. The best laid plans without a whole lot of serendipity don't go very far. In order to help others, first you got to take care of yourself. I run up against this one on a regular basis. I hope for each of you that you're taking good care of yourself. I hope that you choose abundance over scarcity. There's a great article. My Facebook feed is public, and I reposted something from the New York Times today, which basically is yet another set of real hard facts on how humanity is getting better, and at the same time, the rhetoric of the news is making us believe that it's getting worse. Go to the facts. And remember that as lonely as you might feel, you never really are. Remember, there's rooms like Expo. There's places that we gather. Remember, there's just somebody on the other end of a card or business or an email that has been through the same thing that you can look up and who will say, you're not alone in this. For cities, I think the most important barometer is belief. The cities that I go to where people think things are getting better, when I go back a year later, they have gotten better. Cities that I go to where people think things are getting worse tend to get worse. The self-fulfilling prophecy. And finally, this one is from Mai Bell. So 6 weeks ago, she told me to never be patient. And 2 weeks ago, she left. And this was the way that she started every meeting, was the only rule that I have at my table is you have to be hopeful and helpful. So I hope you guys will start your meetings that way too. Thanks.